My name is Mara Ellison, and I was 26 on the night my parents brought me to dinner to tell me I had never been their child by blood. My mother was smiling when she said they had kept me because the arrangement had been useful, and now that usefulness had ended. My father pushed a stack of papers over the white tablecloth. They had already taken legal steps to remove me from anything they owned. I did not scream. I did not even ask a question. For nearly a full minute, I just sat there while the room hummed around us. But there was one thing neither of them understood. 7 months earlier, I had found the family I was born into. And that evening, I had placed them 3 tables behind my mother's chair. All she had to do was turn around. What happened when she finally looked over her shoulder is why, 5 years later, I can sit here and tell the story without shaking. Welcome back to Dull Pain Stories, where we tell quiet family stories about dignity, boundaries, and the moment someone stops bending themselves small enough for people who never meant to make room. If you have ever had to prove you belonged at a table that should have welcomed you, this one is for you. Leave a comment below and make sure you subscribe. The restaurant was called Aurelian, and no one had ever taken me there before. My mother picked it. That alone should have warned me, because Celia Ellison never spent real money on me unless a benefit was printed somewhere in invisible ink. She wore the slate wool dress she saved for memorial services and investor meetings. My father, Grant, had made the reservation under her name instead of mine, which I noticed when the hostess asked, and he answered too quickly. There was no ribbon on the chair, no candle waiting near the dessert station, no cheerful little sign with my name on it. For a birthday dinner, the table looked almost sterile. The air between my parents had the polished chill of people about to deliver a decision. I had spent 5 years in rooms with that exact temperature. I arranged tables like that for clients, for signings, for careful family meetings after a death when money needed a new address. I knew the difference between a meal and a proceeding. This felt like a proceeding with wine glasses. So I did the thing I had taught myself to do whenever a room turned dangerous. I slowed my breathing and counted every exit. That was when I noticed the brass table marker behind us and a little to the left. Table 12. I stored it in my mind before I knew why, the way you notice a landmark before admitting you may need a way back. I placed my own item beside the water glass. A slim tan folder. Plain. Ordinary. My mother glanced at it, and I think, assumed it held work papers or perhaps a card. She had no idea what was inside. You need to understand birthdays in the Ellison house to understand why the absence of celebration did not surprise me. When I was little, my birthday meant 1 candle. Not 1 candle as a family custom, not one of those pretty number candles people buy on purpose. I mean a single cheap candle shoved into a supermarket cupcake my mother grabbed on her drive home and left sweating on the counter while she finished a phone call. 2 weeks later, my cousin Nolan would get a rented magician, a backyard tent, and trays of tiny sandwiches because Nolan was Aunt Carol's son, and Nolan was blood. I remember asking when I turned 7 if I could have a party too. My aunt happened to be in the kitchen, drinking my mother's white wine, and she answered before my mother did. "We can only do one special thing this month, sweetheart," she said it softly. That was what taught me the lesson. People can sound tender while they are explaining exactly how little space you deserve. So I learned the household math. A cupcake cost less than a party. A child who asked for almost nothing was easier than a child who asked for fairness. By the time I was 10, I had stopped asking for cake because I could see how relieved everyone looked when I made myself cheaper. Being low maintenance felt like the only thing I had to trade. I did not call it loneliness. I called it being sensible. That is what happens when you grow up as a useful person. You do not realize someone has attached a price to you until they finally read the amount aloud. And across that white cloth at Aurelian, at 26 years old, I could feel my mother preparing to do exactly that. I left their house the week after I turned 19 with one rolling suitcase, one duffel bag, and an acceptance letter to a 2-year college that I had filled out alone. Nobody packed snacks. Nobody drove me. I worked late shifts at a grocery pharmacy, took morning classes, transferred to the state university, and finished a paralegal certificate while serving brunch on Saturdays. I paid every bill myself. I am not saying that because it makes me heroic. I am saying it because later, when people tried to rewrite the story, that part mattered. No one handed me my life. By 26, I was a paralegal in a downtown trusts and estates office, and I was good at the work. My days were spent inside the machinery of other people's money, preparing the papers that determine what happens to a life after the person who built it is gone. Beneficiary forms, distribution schedules, trustee letters, the careful, dry language that decides who is fed and who is left watching from outside the room after the flowers at the funeral have died. I could read a trust the way some people read a face. And the bitter joke of my life was that I could draw a clean legal boundary for strangers, explain to a widow exactly what belonged to her and what did not, and still could not ask my own family to want me. The only Ellison who ever felt like mine was my grandmother. Every Sunday at 4:30, all through school and after, I called Graham Iris. She was my father's mother, and she answered the phone like the whole week had been waiting for that sound. She had opinions about everyone and apologized for almost none of them. When I was 11 and crying in her kitchen because Nolan had told me I was not a real Ellison, she put down her dish towel, took my face between both hands, and said the sentence I carried like a match for the next 15 years. "You were chosen, darling. You were not gathered up." Then she made me toasted cheese and let me watch television far too late. Graham Iris died when I was 24. 2 years before that dinner, I gave the only eulogy that talked about who she had been instead of what she had left. Within weeks of the funeral, my parents moved out of their narrow little split level and into the larger house on Briar Gate, the old family place tied to my grandmother's name in ways I understood better than they guessed. At the time, I did not think much of it. I was grieving. But during one of our last Sunday calls, Graham Iris had said something in a thin, tired voice that I saved without understanding. "I made sure you would never have to beg anyone for your own life." I thought she meant it as encouragement. A grandmother telling a granddaughter to stand tall. It was not until 7 months before the dinner, while searching county records for a completely different reason, that I learned she had meant it literally, in writing, with a notary seal. The year before I turned 26, my family began going quiet around me. Not peaceful quiet, strategic quiet. Texts that once took half a day to answer took a week. My mother removed me from the holiday planning thread, then acted faintly wounded when I arrived for Thanksgiving without the salad nobody had asked me to bring. Aunt Carol, meanwhile, became louder. She started using a word in the family chat that she had never bothered to use before. Blood. As in, this cabin weekend is just blood relatives. As in, the lake house only sleeps 7 and this time we want to keep it to blood. You understand, don't you? I understood. I understood perfectly. I simply did not yet have the documents that explained why the temperature had dropped all at once in the same season from every side. Families can drift. This was not drift. This was choreography. The part of my brain trained to sort timelines kept flagging it. The way you notice several unrelated checks clearing on the same morning and realize they are not unrelated at all. So when my phone lit up one night in April with my mother's name, and her voice was warmer than it had been in nearly a year, I did not feel loved. I felt the small metallic sound of a lock turning somewhere out of sight. "Mara," she said, and she only used my name that gently when she needed something. "Your father and I would like to take you out for your birthday. Properly this time, we know we never really made a fuss." Every instinct I had built while reading other people's bad news told me the same thing. Too neat. People misunderstand my mother. They imagine cruelty announces itself by shouting. With Celia, cruelty was never loud. It was organized. The cruelty was a woman who had not once managed a real birthday cake, suddenly booking a corner table at Aurelian and calling it making a fuss. When my mother became generous, it meant a calculation somewhere had promised her a return. I had watched that pattern my entire life. I had simply never fully understood that I was the line item. So I said yes in the sweet voice she had trained into me. Then I ended the call and sat at my kitchen table for a long time, doing what I do best. I thought about dates. I thought about Briar Gate. I thought about the word blood appearing in messages at exactly this moment. I thought about the sentence my grandmother had spoken before she died. And I thought about the tan folder already sitting in my work bag, the one I had assembled 7 months earlier for reasons that began with my birth family and ended with knowing exactly what my parents were about to lose. I did not call my parents back and ask them what game they were playing. I did not tell them I had gone to the clerk's office. I made calls of my own instead. Quiet calls. The kind you make once you decide you will not be ambushed. You will be ready. I will tell you in a minute who I called. First, I need you to understand the rule my grandmother never put into words but taught me anyway. When my mother sounds sweet, someone near her is about to pay. I made certain that this time, it would not be me. People hear a story like mine and assume it is about money. I understand why. There is a trust, a house, a packet of papers on a restaurant table. But when I sat in my car outside Aurelian that night with the engine off and the folder on the passenger seat, the thing I feared losing could not be measured in dollars. I was afraid of losing the final idea that I had belonged anywhere at all. Because no matter how cold that house had been, no matter how transactional each candle and casserole had felt, it was the only beginning I knew. They were still, technically, my parents, and if they cut that thread the way I suspected they had come to cut it, then I would be exactly what Nolan had called me at 11. Not a real Ellison. Just a girl someone picked up and set down. That was the bruise they were aiming for, and they knew where it was because they had pressed it for years. What they had not accounted for was that the bruise had already started healing. 7 months can do that when the right people find you. I checked my face in the visor mirror, tucked the folder under my arm, and crossed the parking lot with the strange calm of a woman who has already read the ending while everyone else is still pretending to write the book. I was not walking into a disownment. I was walking into a goodbye I had chosen first. They simply did not know it yet. We ordered drinks before anyone said anything honest. My mother praised the lighting. My father repeated a complaint about valet parking that he had already given me in the car. Then, somewhere between the bread basket and the main courses no one would finish, Celia folded her hands and slipped into the voice. I knew that voice. It was the one she used when she returned a gift in front of me and explained that it was not practical. "We have always done the best we could for you," she began. Grant nodded a fraction too late, as he had nodded behind her for my entire life. "We gave you a home," she continued. "We made sure you were educated, more than many children receive." I let her speak. I kept one hand flat on the folder near my plate and watched my father's eyes dart to it then away. There was a typed label on the tab with only the top edge visible beneath my fingers. If he looked carefully, he could see 4 letters. He looked twice. I covered the rest with my thumb, not because I needed to hide it, but because curiosity is a useful pressure. I saw the wondering begin to work on him. My mother went on about sacrifice, about how a grown child should understand the cost of being raised. I thought about one damp cupcake and one candle, and I said nothing. Then she paused, lifted her glass, took a tiny sip, and set it down with the precision of a woman reaching the slide she had practiced. She looked straight at me. "There is something, Mara, that you should have been told years ago. You were adopted," my mother said. She said it the way someone might announce that a reservation had been moved from 7 to 7:30. "We adopted you when you were a baby. You are not ours biologically. I want you to know we never meant to keep it from you forever." She watched my face as she spoke, waiting for the collapse. That was what the evening had been built around. The corner table, the good dress, the rehearsed pauses. All of it designed to land on the moment her adopted daughter learned she had been a stranger all along and broke into pieces tidy enough to sweep away. I would like to say the words missed me. They did not. Some primitive part of a person trusts the floor to exist, and mine had just been told there had never been a floor. But I had already had 7 months to learn the truth. The only thing my mother revealed that night was how little she knew about me. She leaned closer, almost tender, and delivered the sentence that will probably follow me through quiet kitchens and waiting rooms for the rest of my life. "We kept you because it helped us." She smiled. In the end, that smile freed me more than the sentence did. Cruelty was familiar. I had been raised on cruelty polished until it looked like manners. But that smile was different. A person does not smile while handing you the worst news of your life unless she has rehearsed it often enough to enjoy the timing. In that smile, I saw the shape of my childhood all at once. I had not been a disappointing daughter. I had been an asset that had reached the end of its useful life. Helped is a clean word for a dirty bargain. My father, to his shame, tried to explain it as if he were defending an accounting choice. "There were support payments at first," Grant said, avoiding my eyes. "When you were young, the adoption included a modest monthly stipend. That ended years ago while you were still in school. After that, there were tax considerations, and your grandmother, of course." He did not say Graham Iris. He said his mother had certain expectations about family. He said adopting me had helped them satisfy those expectations, and satisfying them had proved, in his careful words, beneficial for quite a long time. I sat still and let the numbers of my childhood rearrange themselves into the true formula. The single cupcake. The second-hand clothes from Nolan, sometimes still carrying return tags from Carol's errands. The way the heat in my room was lowered first, they had not been broke. They had been keeping the difference between what a child cost and what a child brought in. And I had been the child who brought it in. "We invested in you," my father said, as if that ended the matter. As if I were an apartment building with a long-term yield. My mother, impatient with his cautious language, cut straight to the bottom line. "The stipend ended years ago, Mara, and the arrangement that came after it ends now. You're 26. There is nothing further that keeping you close does for us." She almost sounded sorry, the way someone might regret that a coupon had expired. "You're no longer useful." 2 sentences. That was all it took for them to reduce 26 years of being their daughter to a revenue stream that had stopped paying. I reached for my water. My hand did not tremble. I noticed that, and I kept it as a small mercy. Then my father did what he had come to do. He opened the leather folio beside his plate, the one I had pretended to think held a birthday card, and slid a thin packet across the table until it touched the rim of my plate. "We have already filed," he said, "to formalize the separation. You will not be named in our wills. You will not receive beneficiary status on anything of ours. We wanted to make it clear in person so there would be no confusion." He had practiced the word clear. I could hear the lawyer behind it. Here is the part my family never managed to understand, the part that changed the night for me before I opened my mouth. I read the caption at the top of the first page in about 3 seconds. I had read hundreds of documents like it. Immediately, I saw what they had done. They had aimed at the wrong instrument. They had paid someone to cut me out of an estate that barely mattered, while leaving untouched the document that controlled the thing they truly cared about. They did not know what I knew. They thought the power in that room ran through their own small will, so that was where they pointed their little expensive blade. I did not correct them. You do not tell people on the other side of the table that they have filed against the wrong thing. You let them finish their performance. So I nudged the papers back toward the middle of the table, neither accepting them nor refusing them. I let them keep thinking they had won. My mother's handbag buzzed, and then Aunt Carol's voice came through on speaker because of course Carol was listening. Carol had helped design at least half of this. "Blood protects blood, Mara," she said, smooth and warm and sharp. "You have always understood that." I still did not cry. I want to be honest. Some part of me expected to. There was an 11-year-old in my chest who had been waiting for this exact table since the night Nalan told her she was not real. But the 26-year-old sitting there only took a slow sip of water and set the glass down without a sound. That was when I saw something cross my mother's face that I had never seen there before. Disappointment. Not disappointment in me. Disappointment in the scene. She had written the moment with a sobbing girl in the leading role. The girl was not sobbing, and that was ruining the ending. "Do you have nothing to say?" she asked. Now there was an edge under the polish, the brittle sound of a script slipping out of order. I considered the question. I considered the flood of words backed up behind one small dam. Then she made the mistake people like her always make. She tried to fill silence with the line that had worked once, trusting it would work again. "We kept you because it helped us," she repeated, slower this time, pressing her weight onto every word. But a sentence loses power the second time it comes from the same mouth. The first time it had been a revelation. The second time it was a confession and not about me. It told me what she was. It did not tell me what I was worth. I laid my napkin across my lap, smoothed it once, and let her watch me remain whole. Behind her, at table 12, a woman with my exact mouth turned toward us and went completely still. To explain what was in my folder, I need to go back 7 months to the week 2 envelopes arrived and rearranged my entire life. The first was the one I had been hoping for without admitting how badly. After Graham Iris died, I registered with the state's adoption reunion program, half sure nothing would ever come of it. 9 weeks later, a letter arrived in handwriting I did not recognize. Careful, rounded, the hand of someone who had practiced what she needed to say. It was from Maurice Calder. She wrote that she had been 20 when she surrendered me. She wrote that she had not wanted to let me go. She wrote that she had thought of me every April for 26 years, and that if I ever wanted to meet, she would drive however far she needed to drive on any day I chose with no expectations. She signed her name. Beneath it, she added one more sentence. I read it so many times the fold in the paper began to soften. I never stopped saving you a place. The second envelope came 4 days later, and I thought it had nothing to do with Maurice. Our state had recently made original birth records available to adult adoptees who filed the right request after turning 22. I had sent mine through the same registry the week Maurice's letter came. While I was already inside the county system, waiting on my file, professional habit took over. A dentist notices teeth. A paralegal notices public records. I pulled my grandmother's estate documents. And there it was, inside the distribution schedule of the Iris Ellison Family Trust, signed 3 years before she died and administered not by my parents but by a bank. The caregiver distributions to Grant and Celia Ellison shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 26th birthday, whereupon the remainder shall pass to my granddaughter, Mara. Not their estate. Hers. Held by a trustee they did not control. scheduled to move beyond their reach forever on the exact date they later chose for dinner. 2 envelopes in the same week. One told me where I had come from. The other told me, in my grandmother's notarized words, exactly what my parents were about to lose and why they had suddenly grown so urgent. I did not call my mother and scream the discovery into the phone. That is not the weapon I have, and it is not the one I trust. I have watched too many families ruin their position with a satisfying outburst that a lawyer later turns into a problem. What I had was procedure, so I used procedure. I took a personal day and brought the trust papers to an estate attorney who had no connection to my family. I paid her from my savings to confirm what I already suspected. The caregiver distributions were real. They were ongoing, and they were ending. For most of 2 decades, my parents had received monthly money tied to raising me and had lived in a house maintained through the trust. On my 26th birthday, the remainder passed to me by the trust's own terms, through a corporate trustee, with nothing my parents could sign, file, hide, or destroy to stop it. Their will did not touch it. Their disownment was theater staged in the wrong building. My attorney asked whether I wanted to notify them, get ahead of the moment, soften it. I said no. I said I wanted 3 things in a folder and nothing else. First, the retainer letter, so they would know I had counsel. Second, the trust distribution schedule, so the date would sit in front of them in black and white. Third, my original birth certificate, with Maurice Calder's name in the mother's line, so that when the moment came, everyone at the table would understand exactly which family I was walking away from and which one I was walking toward. I labeled the folder, closed it, put it in my bag, and carried it for 7 months like an engine I had not yet started. The dinner invitation only told me when to turn the key. I met Maurice Calder for the first time at a diner between our towns because she insisted I should not have to drive the whole distance. That small kindness nearly undid me before we even sat down. She was nervous. She had brought a photo album she kept opening and closing in her lap, as though she was not sure she had earned the right to show me. She had my mouth and my habit of becoming very quiet when feelings got too large. Over 7 months, we built something carefully, like repairing a bridge while standing on the boards. I learned I had a half-brother named Leo, 22, all questions and awkward elbows, who began sending me ridiculous videos within 10 days of meeting me, as if I had always been one of the people he sent them to. I learned my birth grandmother was a small, fierce woman named June who looked me over once and said, "There you are," as though I had been delayed by traffic, not gone for more than 2 decades. They did not ask me for anything. That was the part my nervous system could not understand. No favors, no money, no role to perform. Maurice said something during our 3rd meeting that became one of the truest lines of my life. "We kept a place for you, honey. We never gave it away." And I, who could write a perfect beneficiary clause for a stranger and knew the exact legal language of belonging, sat in a vinyl booth with no idea what to do with my hands. For the first time in my life, people wanted me and gained nothing from wanting me. After 26 years of being useful, I did not know how to be welcome. I was about to learn quickly. There is a difference between being needed and being wanted, and I had only known one of them. Being needed made sense. Being needed is work. You arrive on time, produce the right result, stay pleasant, keep the equation simple. In exchange, your seat remains yours for 1 more season. I had been needed my entire life. I mistook its consistency for love, the way a person can mistake a road for a home because she travels it every day. What Maurice, Leo, and June offered had no task attached, and that frightened me more deeply than my mother ever had. The first time Maurice called just to ask how my week had been, with no request hidden underneath, I waited the entire call for the catch. When none came, I had to pull into a parking lot because I could not see clearly enough to drive. I tested them in small, ungenerous ways that still embarrass me. I canceled dinner once to see whether they would punish me. They did not. They said, "Of course." Another time, and they meant it. I offered to pay for everything so I could earn my place. June finally took my face in both hands the way Graham Iris used to and said, "Child, stop trying to buy the door. It was already open." Slowly, over those 7 months, a knot I had carried since I was 10 did not disappear exactly, but it loosened. Against 26 years of evidence, I began to believe someone might simply want me in the room. So when my mother invited me to celebrate my birthday properly, I already knew where I wanted to spend the evening. I only decided to spend it in both places at once. Here is who I called. The night Celia booked Aurelian, I called Mary's and asked a question I had been too afraid to ask anyone. "Would you come to my birthday dinner?" I explained the whole shape of it. My parents, my suspicions, the trust, the speech I could feel coming before it arrived. I told her I did not know the exact words they planned to use, but I knew I did not want to hear them by myself. I knew I no longer wanted to perform the grief they were counting on. Mary's did not hesitate. "What time?" she asked. "And how dressed up should we be?" Then she said something that made me cover my mouth at my kitchen table. "We would be honored to watch you not need them." So I made another call, this one to Aurelian, and booked a second table for the same evening under my own name. Mara Ellison, party of 3. "Table 12, the host told me. "Near the rear, 3 tables behind the Ellison reservation at the front." I almost laughed at the geometry. My parents had no idea they would be performing my rejection within view of the family that had spent 26 years keeping me a place. I told Mary's, June, and Leo to arrive shortly after us, order quietly, simply be there, and let me come to them when I was ready. I will not pretend I did not want witnesses. I did. There is a reason the truth lands differently when spoken in front of people rather than sealed in a letter. I had seen enough private confrontations turn into competing stories later. So yes, I wanted witnesses, and I am not ashamed of that. But Mary's, June, and Leo were never only witnesses to me. That was the difference between what they were doing and what my mother was doing. The folder was how I would show my parents they had lost. Table 12 was where I would go to remember I had already won before anyone ordered wine. Back at the front table, in the present, my mother decided my silence had lasted long enough and moved to finish the transaction. She pulled another page from the leather folio and turned it toward me, then uncapped a pen and placed it across the bottom as though offering a gift. "It's only an acknowledgement," she said, "that we informed you and that you understand the circumstances. Sign it, and we can have a civil dinner, then everyone can move forward." I looked at the page and did not need to read much. The release paragraph began with boilerplate I had typed 100 times myself. The signer waives and forever releases any claim, interest, expectation, or demand. The rest did what that language always does. It was not an acknowledgement. It was a waiver disguised as one. A neat little document meant to put on record that I had been told and had no claim. Exactly the kind of thing a careful lawyer drafts to prevent the challenge I was in a position to make. They wanted my signature while I was still supposed to be bleeding from the reveal, before shock gave way to thought. It was a classic move. I have seen grieving people sign away fortunes at kitchen tables because someone put a pen in their hand at the right wounded second. My mother was counting on the wound. She did not know the wound had a trust attached to it. I left the pen where it was. Across from me, my father kept looking at my folder. I watched a red flush creep above his collar. Grant had always been the one who knew where money actually lived. He had seen the letters on the tab. He was doing the same math I had done 7 months earlier, and the answer was beginning to frighten him. "Is there?" he began, then stopped. Is there something we should know, Mara? I gave him the first real smile I had offered all evening. Not yet. That was when Aunt Carol arrived in person, Nolan trailing behind her, both wearing the fake surprise of people who had been waiting near the bar for a text. Mara, what are the odds? Carol said, pressing a cold cheek against mine. I understood instantly. My mother had called in reinforcements. Celia liked an audience for her best work, especially an audience that would nod and add pressure if I became inconvenient. Carol pulled over a chair without asking. Nolan, 27 and still dressed like his mother chose his shirts, gave me the look I had known since childhood. The look that said I would eventually be moved back to the children's table where I belonged. Carol did not bother with subtlety. Subtlety had never been her instrument. We only want what is best for the family, she said, laying her manicured hand on top of my mother's. Families sometimes have to make difficult choices about who is truly part of them. You have always been practical, Mara. You know blood takes care of blood. There it was again. The word she had planted in messages for months, finally spoken aloud at the table it had been planted for. I looked at the aunt who had explained to a 7-year-old why she was not worth a birthday party, and I felt the last thread of obligation inside me go slack. These were not people I was losing. These were people I was putting down. I had carried them far longer than they deserved, and my arms were finally tired in the best possible way. My father was not joining in. He stared at his hands. Then, while Carol was still talking about the family's wishes, Grant leaned toward me and said something so quietly it was meant only for me. Your grandmother loved you. He stopped there. For 1 second, I saw another version of my father, the version that might have existed if he had ever chosen the hard good thing instead of the comfortable weak one. His eyes were wet. He had loved his mother. I knew that much was true. And some part of him understood that the mother he had loved had built a wall around me with her own money because she did not trust her son to protect me. That must be a terrible thing to know at dinner. I waited. I truly waited. There was a version of that night where he said the next sentence. I'm sorry. This is wrong. I will not do this. I would have heard it. It would have mattered. But he looked at my mother, who watched him the way a handler watches a dog wandering too close to traffic, and I saw him choose. He sat back. He picked up his glass. The almost apology died in his throat, exactly where so many almost sentences had died before. That was the closest thing to love anyone at the front table offered me that evening. 4 words and a swallow. I did not hate him for it. You cannot hate a man for weighing exactly what you always knew he weighed. But I understood then why the evening had been so rushed and so cruel. He knew about Graham Iris's trust. He knew the date was coming. He had hoped to get my signature on a waiver before I ever learned what his mother had done for me. So I asked him a question, not loudly, not as a daughter. I asked it in the voice I use at work when I have found the flaw in someone's filing and am giving them the courtesy of noticing it themselves. Dad, I said, which instrument did you file against? Your estate or Graham Iris's trust? The table became quiet in a new way. My mother's glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Carol's fingers froze on Celia's sleeve. Grant blinked at me as if I had started speaking a language he recognized from a country he had avoided. In one question, I told them 3 things they had not budgeted for. I knew there was a difference. I knew which document mattered, and I had known long enough to learn the vocabulary cold. My mother had never heard me use that voice. None of them had. To them, I had always been the quiet one, the convenient one, the girl who took the smaller slice so nobody had to feel guilty. They had built the whole dinner on the assumption that I would receive my fate, not audit it. What? My mother said, and the word came out smaller than she intended. What are you talking about? I let the question hang. The most powerful person in a room is often the one who does not hurry to answer. I turned my water glass slightly, lined it up with the folder's edge, and looked at my father. He had gone pale, he knew. He was silently begging me not to open it. I opened it. There was no flourish, no slammed papers, no dramatic speech. I simply turned the folder toward them and laid 3 pages on the white cloth, side by side, the way I would lay exhibits before a client who needed to understand her own position. The retainer letter came first, on a law office letterhead, confirming that I was represented by counsel. The distribution schedule from the Iris Ellison Family Trust came second, with the relevant paragraph already marked. The original birth certificate came third, showing Maurice Calder's name where my mother had assumed only her own mattered. I did not point. I let paper do what paper does. My mother's eyes went to the trust schedule first, because of course they did. Some animal part of her had always known where the money slept. I watched her read. I watched the words land. The caregiver distributions to Grant and Celia Ellison shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 26th birthday, whereupon the remainder shall pass to my granddaughter, Mara. I watched her reach remainder. I watched her reach Mara. The color drained from her face from top to bottom like a shade being lowered. She looked at me, then at Grant, then back at the page, the way people do when they hope a second reading will be kinder than the first. It was not. It never is. "Mom," I said gently, because I could afford gentleness now, "you filed against the wrong family. The one you cut me out of was always the smaller one." My mother is quick. I will give her that. Even then, it took her only about 12 seconds to assemble the whole picture. Briar Gate, the house funded by the trust she had assumed would shelter her forever. The monthly distributions that had quietly supported her life and would stop that night by their own terms. The remainder, the real value, the part she had lived beside for years without controlling, passing on this exact date to the daughter she had just declared finished. And the waiver, her clever little waiver, which I had been expected to sign while hurt and stunned. Worthless, because it released claims against an estate where the real value had never lived. She had aimed every tool she owned at a will and missed the trust completely. The cruelty had cost her nothing. The mistake would cost her dearly. That is where I learned the final lesson my mother had left to teach me. People like Celia do not apologize when they are caught. They pivot. Her face rearranged itself. The cold drained away and a terrible warmth rushed in. She reached across the table for my hand. "Mara," she said, voice suddenly soft and damp and motherly in a way it had never been when tenderness carried a price. "Whatever is in those papers, we are still your parents. Nothing changes that. We are family. Family." From the mouth that, less than half an hour earlier, had told me I was kept because I helped. I looked at her hand and did not take it. The sentence she had meant as a weapon had become the confession that released me. People think this is the part where I made them suffer, where I announced a dollar figure, watched them shrink, ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, and left them with the bill. I understand that hunger. I have felt it too. But I know something about power because I handle the paperwork for it every day. The strongest position in a room is not always the one attached to the largest number. Sometimes it is the one that does not need the number to stand. I had work I had earned, savings I had built, a life I had made with late shifts and morning classes and documents drafted for strangers. I did not need my grandmother's remainder to be free. That, more than any amount in the trust, was what frightened my mother. She could not buy back control over someone who was no longer for sale. I gathered the 3 pages into the folder, not hurriedly, not dramatically, just with the clean motion of a person closing a file because the relevant point has been made. My mother's hand still hovered in the air where mine was supposed to be. "Sit down," she said. The fake softness vanished. The old control snapped back into her voice. "Sit down, Mara. Where do you think you're going?" Carol straightened. Nolan finally stopped smirking. My father looked only tired, like a man watching the one decent thing his mother had ever protected move beyond him forever. I held the folder against my chest and looked at the woman who had spent 26 years trying to teach me that I had no real place. Then I told her where I was going. My birth family is sitting 3 tables behind you. I did not say it cruelly. I did not need to. The sentence had been true the whole evening, true while she smiled, true while she rehearsed, true while she pushed a waiver across the cloth. She thought she had been disowning me in front of strangers. She had not been speaking to strangers. She had been performing within reach of the people who had kept a place for me since before she ever decided I had stopped being useful. I watched the words reach her. I watched my mother begin, slowly, to turn in her chair. She turned the way a person turns when part of her already knows and is begging the rest of the room to prove it wrong. Her shoulders moved first, then her chin. And there, at table 12, 3 tables back under the low warm light, sat Maurice, June, and Leo. They had been there the entire time. They had ordered quietly and eaten almost nothing. They had watched my mother deliver the ugliest sentences of my life and had kept their seats because I had asked them to let me come when I was ready. Maurice met my mother's eyes first. She did not glare. She did not smile in victory. She simply looked at the woman who had raised her daughter with a candle and a calculator. Then she looked at me, and her whole face opened like a window on the first day of spring. June already had her napkin folded beside her plate, ready to stand. Leo had stopped pretending to look at his phone. My mother's gaze moved from Mari's mouth to mine and back again, doing the resemblance math. I saw the exact second she understood that the family she had just told me I did not have was sitting about 16 feet behind her in real chairs, at a real table, having watched her say the one thing she could never unsay. She turned back to me. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time in my life, my mother had no script. And in the silence where her next cruel line should have been, a chair scraped at table 12. They stood, all 3 of them, not to make a scene. Not to confront my parents. Just to be on their feet when I crossed the room, the way people stand at an arrival gate for someone coming home after a long delay. June stood first because June does everything first. Then Maurice, then Leo, bumping his knee against the table in his rush. They did not say a word to my parents. They did not have to. Their standing said everything. The restaurant had grown quiet around us. That particular hush strangers fall into when something true is happening and everyone has stopped pretending not to notice. A server paused with a tray in both hands. Someone at the bar lowered his glass. I walked past my mother, still half turned in her chair. Past Carol, whose mouth had finally run out of blood. Past Nolan, who looked suddenly smaller than he had in years. Past my father, who lifted his eyes as I passed and then dropped them again, choosing ease one last time. 16 feet. 3 tables, 26 years. When I reached them, June took my face between both hands the way Graham Iris used to. Maurice pulled out the empty chair beside her, the 4th chair, the one they had asked the host to set even though their reservation was only for 3. Then she said the sentence she had written under her name in that first letter, the sentence I had read until the paper softened. "We saved you a place," she said. "We always did." I sat down in it. In the chair that had been waiting through my whole life, at the table that wanted me before anyone knew whether I would ever arrive. That was when my mother lost the one thing she had never lost in public, her composure. I heard her chair scrape. I heard her stand. I heard the smooth dinner table mask crack right through the middle. "After everything we paid for," she said, and this time she was not quiet. Her voice cut across the dining room, sharp and rising. "After everything we did. The roof, the schools, the years, and you humiliate your family in public over money." Heads turned fully now. Carol tugged at my mother's sleeve and hissed, "Celia, sit down, people are staring." But my mother had slipped beyond even her own handler's reach. The script had burned away, and all she had left was truth coming out crooked. "We gave you everything," she said to a room of strangers. I noticed she said gave, not loved. Even trapped, even exposed, the word love could not find its way out because it had never been in inventory. I stayed seated at table 12. I did not stand to match her. I did not raise my voice to meet hers. Mari's hand found mine under the table, and I held on while my mother grew loud enough to do my work for me. Everyone in that restaurant could see a calm young woman sitting with people who clearly adored her, while an older woman shouted about what she had paid. No human being hears a parent scream about cost and thinks, yes, that must be love. My father never stood. He put his face into his hands. I let my mother run out of words the way a storm runs out of rain. When the quiet returned, I did one final thing before giving the rest of my attention to the people at my table. I stood, walked the 3 tables back to the front, and placed one page on the white cloth in front of her. The trust distribution schedule. Face up. I did not need that copy anymore. My lawyer had the originals. I wanted my mother to have something to read during the longest evening of her life. "You can keep this," I said. "You'll want to understand what ended tonight and what didn't." She stared at the page. Grant reached toward it and then stopped. I looked at the two of them. My mother, who had valued me at one candle. My father, who had loved his mother too much to ignore her completely and too little to honor her while it mattered. Then I said the only sentence I had prepared in advance, the one I had written in my head in the parking lot and promised myself I would use only if I had earned it. "You kept me because I helped you. They kept a place for me." Then I turned around and went back to table 12. I did not look behind me, not once. Not when Carol called my name. Not when my mother said something I could not make out and did not want to. I sat beside Mari's. June had ordered a slice of chocolate cake while I was gone. Leo had stuck a small restaurant candle into it, one flame trembling in the low light. For a second, the symmetry caught in my throat. Then Mari's leaned close and said, "Blow it out, honey, make a wish." And I realized I did not have one. I already had it. The trust did exactly what my grandmother had built it to do. On my 26th birthday, the caregiver distributions to Grant and Celia Ellison ended on the date, and under the terms Graham Iris had signed 3 years before she died. The remainder transferred to me through the bank trustee, untouched by the will my parents had spent money revising, because you cannot disinherit someone from a trust you do not control. The waiver, unsigned, was worth exactly what it had always been worth. Within 14 months, my parents sold the house on Briar Gate because without the distributions they could not carry it. They moved into something smaller. I was told Carol was furious when she understood that none of Graham Iris's money would be drifting toward Nolan after all. The story of that dinner traveled the way family stories travel, first through relatives and then beyond them. The version where Celia Ellison was a devoted mother betrayed by an ungrateful adopted daughter never really took hold, because too many strangers at Aurelian had watched a woman shout about everything she had paid, while a quiet woman held hands with the family 3 tables away. I did not sue. I did not post. I did not explain myself to anyone who had spent years misunderstanding me on purpose. I simply stopped answering. Silence became the boundary, and it was the only kind that ever truly held. My father texted once a few weeks later. 3 words, "I am sorry, no name, no follow-up." I did not reply. I have never replied. Later, I heard that when Carol tried to gather relatives to challenge Graham Iris's trust, Grant was the one who quietly stopped it. He told them his mother had the right to leave her money where she chose. He said it was finished. He was correct. He was also, as always, late. He said the right thing in the wrong room after it cost him nothing. That was my father in the end. A man who could recognize the right choice, even feel it, but only managed to choose it after choosing it no longer required courage. I did not need his apology, but I was glad he finally said one true thing out loud. As for the rest, I spent my first real birthday eating chocolate cake at table 12 with people who gained nothing by wanting me. I have spent every birthday since with them. Maris and I talk every Sunday now, at 4:30, the hour I once saved for Graham Iris. June taught me how to make her toasted cheese. Leo still sends ridiculous videos. Somewhere in a drawer in my new family's kitchen, there is a photo album that no longer closes properly because it finally has enough pages. Being useful was the only thing my parents ever wanted from me. Being wanted was the thing I had never known. It took me 26 years and one terrible dinner to understand that anyone who keeps you only because you benefit them has already told you, in the clearest language possible, that they were never your family. That is my story. One candle for 25 years. And on the 26th, a whole table that lit one without being asked. If someone in your life values you only when you are useful, let this be your sign to stop auditioning for a seat you already deserve. You do not have to earn the people who love you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.